The first cry sliced the night like glass, and Maya Brooke said, "There was never supposed to be a baby." Fluorescent light hummed, sharp as a verdict. A nurse leaned close and whispered, "Lily Cole." The name detonated in Maya's chest. Yet, footsteps thundered down a sterile corridor that smelled of bleach and fear. Paper rustled like wings as forms changed destinies. Maya said, "That last name is wrong." The nurse did not blink. Somewhere a door clicked, and a gavel memory echoed. Evan Cole walked into a courtroom in her mind, calm as ice. A clerk murmured, "Paternity confirmed." Maya gripped the rail and said, "He does not get to own this." The baby cried again, softer, like apology. The world tilted and monitors hiccuped. Maya said, "I will not be her mother." The nurse whispered, "Someone already is." Silence pressed close, hot and merciless. Maya felt the word, "Mama," rise, like a bruise. She swallowed it whole. Rain hammered the loading bay as alarms burst softly inside, and Maya said, "I kept my life small for a reason." Cold air bit through her hoodie, while the nurse's whisper repeated in her ears. She saw a map of exits, none leading out of the truth. A forklift beeped like a metronome of dread. Maya said, "Names are cages when men build them." She pictured Evan's cool eyes and the weight of his signature. A memory of a motel room key burned her palm. She shook it off like sparks. A security guard glanced over and looked away, already judging. Maya said, "I am not the story they want." The rain smelled like tin and regret. Thunder rolled low and patient, as if counting down. Somewhere, the baby hiccuped silence between cries. The sound found her and would not let go. The courtroom smelled of Polish and old arguments, while the clerk read numbers like scripture. Evan Cole stood with shoulders relaxed and he said, "Let us proceed." His calm felt like insult and armor. A hush moved through the benches like a tide pulling back. The judge adjusted his glasses and said, "Results are definitive." Evan did not smile. He did not blink. Maya stood in the back and tasted iron, even as she told herself she would not care. Paper whispered as if gossiping. The seal above the bench watched with bronze indifference. Maya said, "He believes proof is custody." The clerk stamped red, and the room breathed out. The word father weighed the air, and it refused to rise. In the hallway, voices blurred into a single cold current. Evan approached with that effortless stride, and Maya said, "You do not get to rename her." He paused like a cat before a glass door. He said, "Facts do not need permission." His tone was silk that could cut. Footfalls echoed like coins dropped on tile. Maya said, "You vanished when it counted." He tilted his head and said, "I was told nothing existed." The lie hung there, polished and convenient. A bailiff walked between them, breaking the charge. Maya felt the baby's cry again, as if threaded through her ribs. She said, "She is not a headline." Evan's gaze cooled a degree, and then he looked away. Back at the nursery window, machines ticked like patient clocks. Ruth watched from a distance, stern as mercy. Maya said, "I made a promise to keep myself free." The glass reflected a stranger with tired eyes. A lull in the crying felt like a held breath. A memory cracked open, and Caleb's heart said in her head, "Keep quiet, and it will pass." Shame rose, hot and old. Maya said, "I am done with passing." Thunder rolled again, as if the sky approved. She placed her palm against the glass, not touching, almost praying. The baby stirred, fingers uncurling like a question. Maya whispered, "No one will own your first word." The vow landed like a blade turned into a key. Morning found the city rinsed but not clean, and Maya said, "If I look too long, I see a door closing." Coffee steamed like a warning she could not drink. She traced the rim and counted the chips as if they were years. The hospital buzzed beyond the cafeteria glass, relentless and ordinary. Maya said, "I promised myself I would not be anyone's anchor." A stroller squeaked past. and her chest pinched like a hinge. She remembered sleeping in cars and calling that freedom. The word mother felt like a chain and a key. Ruth approached with steady steps and did not sit. Maya said, "Do not ask me what I will do." Ruth did not flinch and said, "I will ask who you are when no one is watching." The question cracked open a quiet place that had waited too long. They stood by the nursery glass while monitors ticked, and Ruth said, "You are not required to be fearless to be true." Maya watched the small rise and fall, and felt the room tilt. She said, "Truth once cost me every friend." Ruth's voice softened like worn leather and said, "Then spend it where it matters." A volunteer wheeled in blankets, and the scent of detergent sharpened the air. Maya said, "Love is a door that locks from both sides." Ruth said, "It is a door that learns to stay open." The words scraped, but did not bleed. Maya pressed her knuckles to the frame and found them steady. She said, "If I try, I might fail loudly." Ruth said, "If you refuse, you will fail quietly." The silence after carried more weight than pain. The past slid in like a draft, and Caleb Hart said, "You wanted escape more than answers." They had sat in a motel glow that yellowed every lie. Maya said, "I wanted to survive the week." He had smiled and counted cash like rosary beads. A siren had threaded through the walls like doubt. Maya said, "You told me freedom means never looking back." Caleb had said, "Freedom means never getting caught." The lesson had stuck like gum on a shoe. Now she saw the price stitched under each boast. She said, "I mistook running for flight." The memory sighed and folded itself small. She touched her chest and felt the echo fade. In its place sat a softer, heavier thing that refused to move. Word traveled faster than care, and the hallway grew teeth. A woman at the vending machine said, "Some people collect trouble like charms." Plastic clacked as snacks fell like verdicts. Maya said, "Some people hand it out like flyers." The woman lifted her chin with a smirk that begged a crowd. A security camera blinked as if bored by the ritual. The whisper spread with the ease of a stain. Maya said, "I will not be your lesson or your relief." The woman rolled her eyes and said, "Then stop giving us something to see." Ruth appeared, not smiling, and the current cooled. Maya inhaled and tasted metal, then let it go. The gossip walked away, unsatisfied and hungry. Evening softened the glass until it held them both, and Maya said, "I was built to leave before the leaving hurt." The nursery hummed like a low prayer. Lily wriggled and made a sound that felt like a key turning. Ruth stood back and let the space belong to them. Maya said, "I am not ready to be anything." The truth did not strike, it settled. She lifted her palm and matched it to tiny fingers through the air. She said, "I know fear will not wait for permission." The fear did not retreat, but it bowed. Somewhere, a lullaby video looped, tinny and brave. Maya said, "I will try until I am someone who can." The words did not solve the night. They lit it. Morning arrived with a notice folded like a blade, and Maya said, "They want what I have not claimed." The envelope wore a firm seal that smelled of ink and threat. Evan's attorney voice lingered in the header like perfume. Ruth read silently and did not soften. Maya said, "Custody sounds like a cage with curtains." The letter promised hearings and timelines that strangled days. A nurse paused, curious, then hurried away with studied innocence. Maya said, "He moves first because he knows I hesitate." The hallway thrummed with carts, and a hush that judged. Ruth said, "Paper is loud until a person stands up." The words shook a bolt loose in Maya's chest. She folded the notice, smaller and smaller, until it could not breathe. Evan waited in a glass conference room that reflected him twice, and Maya said, "You filed before you asked." He did not sit and said, "I acted while you delayed." His certainty clicked like a metronome for pride. A city siren drifted up and curled against the ceiling. Maya said, "You left a silence and tried to patent it." He adjusted a cufflink as if polishing proof. The lawyer watched like a hawk that had already eaten. Maya said, "She is not a trophy for your steadiness." Evan said, "She is mine to protect when you refuse." The word protect shrank the room to a glass box. A printer hummed, spitting out futures neither wanted. Outside, the world performed its indifference, and a friend from old night said, "You were better when no one needed you." The words scraped like gravel in a pocket. Maya said, "I was louder, not better." The friend laughed and said, "You will fold by Friday." The clock over the bus stop blinked its tired green. Maya said, "I am learning the cost of staying." The friend's smile thinned, then walked away with the crowd. Wind tugged at a flyer for cheap rooms and cheap sins. Maya said, "I will not rent myself again." The traffic sighed and carried off the witness. In the distance, the hospital windows kept their steady glow. The hearing date pinned the calendar like a moth, and Ruth said, "Preparation is a kind of mercy." File folders fanned on the table like blunt wings. Maya said, "Mercy feels like homework assigned by fate." Ruth slid forms forward and named each piece with quiet care. The words home study hummed with a chill that bit bone. Maya said, "They will measure me and find me thin." Ruth said, "They will measure truth and find you enough." A clock ticked as if it needed proof too. Maya signed and felt the pen weigh more than metal. The room brightened without the bulb changing at all. Night gathered like a verdict and then paused, and Maya said, "If I fail, let me fail toward her." The nursery lights dimmed to a hush that held breath. Evan appeared at the glass and did not knock. He said, "You do not have to make this a war." The word war tasted like metal and memory. Maya said, "You made it a march with papers and seals." He looked at Lily and something in him unclenched. He said, "I fear what I do not control." The confession wavered like heat above asphalt. Maya said, "I fear what I cannot forgive." Silence arranged them on either side of the truth. The baby slept, refusing to be the weapon. The courthouse air trembled with whispers, and the clerk said, "There is a correction to be entered." Pages rustled like dry leaves, heavy with revelation. Maya said, "Corrections never save, they expose." The judge's brow furrowed, as if struck. Evan leaned forward, and his voice cracked on steel. "What correction?" The clerk read from the sealed file, each word dragging chains. Maya felt the ground tilt beneath her, a truth clawing its way out. Ruth gripped her arm and whispered, "Breathe, child, breathe." The sentence fell, naming another as the parent. Silence snapped the room into shards. Maya said, "Say it again?" The clerk said, "Paternity belongs to Caleb Hart." The sound shattered everything familiar. The hallway spun like a carousel of judgment, and Maya said, "He cannot be tied to this." Caleb's name hissed through every mouth as if poisoned. Evan's voice struck behind her. "You knew?" Maya turned, her pulse a drum, and said, "If I knew, I would have burned it down." Evan's glare cracked but did not collapse. Ruth stood between them, stern as stone. She said, "Secrets rot families faster than grief." Caleb appeared, dragged by officers like an omen. His eyes darted but did not rest. Maya said, "Tell them you lied." Caleb said, "I never lie, I rearrange." His smirk carried the ruin of years. In the holding cell shadows, Caleb said, "You were always running, and I was always catching." Maya stared at bars that divided more than space. She said, "You never caught me, you cornered me." Caleb leaned back, smirk faltering into fatigue. He said, "That baby ties you to me forever." Maya spat words like glass. "She ties me to no one but herself." Silence swelled, heavy with rust and memory. Caleb's laugh broke sharp and hollow. He said, "Blood proves more than promises." Maya stepped close, her hands shaking, and said, "Promises build more than blood." His eyes widened, a crack where arrogance leaked. Ruth sat with Maya in the hospital chapel, soft light painting their faces, and said, "Secrets burn differently than lies." Stained glass fractured the dawn into shards of color. Maya said, "I feel like I was born inside his shadow." Ruth clasped her hands, steady and unyielding. She said, "Then step into a light that is yours." Maya's chest heaved as if air had turned solid. Candles flickered like small rebellions. Maya said, "I do not know if I have the strength." Ruth pressed her hand and said, "Strength is choosing even when you shake." The words rooted, not fast, but sure. That night, Evan stood by the nursery window and his voice was low. "I am not the father, but I wanted to be." Maya froze, the words slicing deeper than anger. She said, "You wanted control, not kinship." Evan shook his head, shoulders heavy, and said, "I wanted a chance to be more than absence." Baby Lily stirred, her small hand curling. Maya said, "She deserves truth, not performance." Evan pressed his palm against the glass, trembling. He said, "Then give me truth too." Silence hummed like electricity, holding them both in place. The storm inside the courthouse matched the storm outside, thunder pressing against the glass. Maya said, "Every choice costs blood." Evan stood across the aisle, papers clenched like weapons. He said, "This is not about you. It is about her." The judge's gavel struck, demanding silence that did not exist. Ruth whispered from the gallery, "Hold steady." Caleb smirked from his seat in chains, voice dripping. "Funny how truth ruins everyone." Maya's heart slammed like a drum. She said, "Truth ruins lies, not lives." The gallery gasped, and the words felt heavier than stone. The storm outside cracked lightning against the pane, a mirror of their fracture. The confrontation spilled into the hallway, where echoes turned sharp. Maya said, "You fight for her like she is a prize." Evan turned, voice breaking, "I fight because I lost enough already." His eyes burned with grief hidden too long. Caleb chuckled behind the escort's grip and said, "You both fight shadows." Maya faced him and said, "Shadows cannot touch light." The officer shoved Caleb forward, his laughter sour. Ruth's hand pressed against Maya's shoulder, grounding her like stone. She whispered, "Do not waste fire on ashes." The words anchored against the pull of chaos. The nursery became the battlefield no one wanted. Evan pressed close to the glass and said, "If she is his, she is still mine to guard." Maya said, "Guardianship without love is possession." Ruth's reflection hovered like a sentinel between them. Baby Lily stirred, her tiny fists fighting unseen battles. Caleb's echo clung to the walls, though he was not there. Maya said, "She will not inherit your silence, Evan." His hand trembled, but did not fall. He whispered, "Then teach me how not to disappear." The plea cracked the ceiling of arrogance, and Maya felt the first fissure of mercy. The confrontation exploded in a family living room, lit by too many memories. Maya said, "You built lies and expected me to build silence." Caleb snarled, "Lies kept you fed." Evan shouted, "Fed on rot." His fist hit the table, rattling old photographs. Ruth's voice cut through like iron, "Stop before the child inherits your war." The room's air throbbed with decades of blame. Maya's tears burned but did not fall. She said, "I choose her, not you, not you, not this." The declaration hung like lightning, and silence followed as if the house itself bowed. The graveyard silence gathered them at midnight, rain soft against stone. Maya said, "This is where it ends." Caleb laughed, hollow, and said, "Truth never ends, it haunts." Evan stood rigid, coat soaked, and said, "Then let it haunt me, not her." Ruth lit a candle that guttered against the wind. She said, "Light stands even in storms." Maya placed her hand on the stone, whispering, "No more inheritance of shadows." Evan stepped closer, voice breaking, "Let me help carry her future." Silence thickened, then the baby's cry cut through the night from Maya's arms, louder than rain, louder than history. The storm had passed, but its silence weighed heavier than thunder. Maya sat by the nursery window, her voice low. I chose her, and now I must bear that choice. Evan leaned against the frame, shoulders slumped, and said, I have nothing left to fight with but honesty. Ruth placed papers on the table, gentle but firm, and said, Honesty will not erase the scars, but it will keep you from adding new ones. Baby Lily breathed steady, her tiny chest rising with unknowing peace. Maya said, I will carry her, even if it means carrying my own ruins. The night pressed close, but no longer suffocating. The kitchen smelled of coffee and exhaustion, and Ruth said, Families do not heal whole, they heal in pieces. Maya stirred sugar she did not need and said, Pieces still cut. Evan sat at the corner, hands folded, and said, Then I will bleed with you until it dulls. The clock ticked too loudly, marking scars in seconds. Maya said, You cannot buy forgiveness with penance. Evan lowered his eyes and said, I do not want forgiveness, only a chance not to vanish. Ruth sipped and did not speak. Silence stretched, heavy but not cruel. For the first time, Maya allowed it to stay. At the custody office, folders towered like walls, and Maya said, They measure love by paper. The official adjusted glasses, tone clipped. Stability is the court's concern. Evan exhaled as if swallowing fire. He said, We cannot give her stability if we are at war. Maya's hands shook signing forms, but her name did not falter. Ruth stood by, voice unwavering. Stability is not the absence of storms, but the choice to stand in them. The official stamped approval with hollow certainty. Maya said, Then I will stand, even if I tremble. The ink dried like a vow. That evening the city hummed with traffic, but Maya only heard the child's breath. She said, I feared her first word would undo me. Evan sat near, voice soft, Her first word may save you. Ruth rocked gently in the chair, eyes half closed, whispering prayers too quiet to catch. Maya looked down, baby Lily's fingers wrapped around her thumb. She said, If she calls me mother, I will answer. Evan said, And if she calls me father, I will stay. The moment held its own fragile promise, stitched together by choice rather than blood. The cemetery still held echoes of the climax, but tonight it felt calmer. Maya stood before the stone and said, This shadow will not raise her. Evan placed a single white flower and said, I came to lay down what I cannot carry. Ruth folded her coat tighter and whispered, The dead rest, let the living try. Baby Lily cooed softly, unbothered by the ghosts. Maya pressed her lips to the child's head and said, You will inherit light, not weight. Evan's eyes shone but did not fall. The night wind brushed like forgiveness, not full, but enough to breathe. Dawn loosened the night from the hospital, and the city exhaled like a tired choir. Maya said, The storm is over, but the ledger is not. The nursery hummed, patient and practical, as if tallying breaths instead of sins. Evan stood near the doorway, unsure of his shape in this gentler light. He said, If there is a place for me, I will stand where you point. Ruth arranged the last papers and closed the folder like a prayer finished. She said, A life does not begin with a stamp, but it helps to rest the hand. Maya laughed without joy and said, My hand still shakes. Ruth answered, Then the truth can shake with it. The bassinet cover rustled as baby Lily stirred, small feet sketching dreams against cotton. Maya said, I promised never to be a mother, and every choice since has argued with that promise. Evan looked at the child and said, I promised to control what I could, and it cost me the rest. Ruth eased back, letting silence carry the weight like a sturdy bridge. Maya touched the glass and said, If I open this door, I need it to stay open. Mid-morning found them in the social worker's office where plants survived on fluorescent mercy. Maya said, Say the plan out loud so we can hear it fail or hold. The official nodded and mapped a path of visits, checks, and classes that tasted like chalk. Evan said, If steadiness is needed, I will schedule my flaws around it. Ruth smiled at the clumsy gift and said, "Consistency is not a performance, it is a practice." The clock ticked and did not hurry its duty. Maya said, "I will not be graded on a curve of regret." The official wrote without sentiment and said, "You will be evaluated on care and safety." Evan met Maya's eyes and did not look away. He said, "Care is a verb when you allow it to be." Maya breathed in and said, "Then we will conjugate it daily." Ruth folded a brochure and said, "Begin where the hands are, not where the ghosts point." The plan did not sparkle, but it held. Afternoon laid a thin gold across the apartment, and the air smelled like detergent and second chances. Maya said, "This place has never been ready for anyone but me." Evan assembled a crib with the stubborn grace of someone learning patience late. He said, "A hex key is honest about how little it can do alone." Ruth sorted tiny clothes with the care of a general planning piece. She said, "Order is a kindness you give to your future." The radio murmured a song too brave for its melody. Maya said, "I used to leave before the leaving hurt, but I am still here." Evan misread a diagram and laughed like a man who had run out of pride. He said, "I will break and remake until it holds." Ruth looked up, eyes soft as worn leather. She said, "Strength is not the noise you make, it is the weight you carry well." The room steadied around the work, and the day finally answered back. Evening returned them to the nursery window where the first cry had cut their story open. Maya said, "I thought the word mother would steal my air." Evan stood close without crowding and said, "I feared the word father would expose my hollow places." Ruth stayed back as a witness rather than a guard. She said, "Names can bruise, yet they can also bandage." The bassinet light warmed the glass until it looked like a hearth. Maya said, "I am asking the door to stay open." Evan answered, "I am learning not to slam." The nurse adjusted a monitor and granted them a small privacy made of competence. Maya said, "If she calls, I will answer." Evan's mouth trembled and found stillness. He said, "If she calls, I will not vanish." Ruth exhaled like a candle that chose not to die. The night waited for a new word to live in. Night settled like velvet that remembered thunder, and the ward hushed to the tempo of machines that believed in tomorrow. Maya said, "I carried my ruins because I thought they were my proof." Evan's hands hovered above the glass as if the right distance had finally been found. He said, "I learned that control is a mask that eats the face." Ruth touched Maya's shoulder and did not speak, lending weight instead of words. The bassinet stirred, and the child opened her mouth like a small door to a room no one had entered. Maya said, "If she never names me, I will still stand." Evan nodded once, as if signing a line no court had written. The sound came round and soft, the vowel a stone dropped into a lake. Baby Lily said, "Mama." The echo rippled through bone and memory, turning locks Maya had worn like jewelry. She said, "I am here," and the promise rewrote the ledger without asking permission. Evan closed his eyes and let the world fail to break. Ruth's breath shook for the first time in days, and then steadied. The night did not applaud. It simply held them while the word kept ringing.